picture this. It's a hot summer day in 1966, and the world just seems simpler, a little safer.
Yeah.
Now imagine this, a sniper perched atop the University of Texas Tower, just raining terror down on unsuspecting students and civilians.
It's a chilling thought.
That's the reality we're diving into today. The story of Charles Whitman, the Texas Tower sniper.
Wow.
And you've sent us a really fascinating collection of sources for this deep dive. We've got articles, interviews, and even excerpts from Whitman's own diary.
Those diary entries are really something else. They offer a window into his mind, but they also raise more questions than answers.
Well, let's start with the man himself then. Charles Whitman was born in 1941, raised in Lake Worth, Florida. On the surface, it looks like a picture-perfect family, but...
Right, but when you dig a little deeper, a much darker reality emerges. His father, C.A. Whitman, was a successful businessman, sure, but he was also a notoriously abusive disciplinarian. Oh yeah, he physically abused both Charles and his mother, creating a really troubled home environment. It's a classic case of appearances being deceiving, and it's really crucial to understanding Charles's early years.
And it sounds like young Charles was a complex individual himself. He excelled academically, was a gifted musician, even achieved the rank of Eagle Scout. It's hard to reconcile all that with his later actions.
It really is. What's striking is this juxtaposition of achievement and inner turmoil. Despite his successes, there were early warning signs. His father instilled in him a fascination with firearms, even bragged about his son's sharpshooting skills at a young age.
Oh, wow.
It's a disturbing detail, and it really foreshadows the tragedy to come.
At 18, seemingly to escape his father's abuse, Charles joined the Marines. You'd think the strict discipline would be a good fit, but...
Well, initially he thrived, he excelled in his training, even earned a sharpshooter badge. He was stationed at Guantanamo Bay and received a prestigious scholarship to study engineering at the University of Texas at Austin. It seemed like he had turned a corner.
This is where things start to unravel, right? College life with its newfound freedom.
Exactly. Whitman's grades plummeted. He developed a gambling problem, and his behavior became increasingly erratic. There's a particularly disturbing incident where he poached a deer and skinned it in his dorm shower.
Wait, hold on. Skinning a deer in a dorm shower?
Yeah.
That's way beyond a prank.
It was definitely a sign of something deeply unsettling.
Do you think this was an early manifestation of the violence to come?
It's hard to say for certain, but it was definitely a red flag. It suggests a disturbing lack of impulse control and a disregard for societal norms.
So this incident, along with his academic struggles, led to him losing his scholarship and being forced back into active duty. But by this point, his behavior had deteriorated even further. He was insubordinate, even violent, and ultimately faced a court-martial.
For those listeners who might not be familiar with the term, a court-martial is essentially a military trial for serious offenses.
So this escape into the Marines backfired in a big way. The rigid structure that initially seemed beneficial ultimately became a source of conflict and rebellion for him.
Yeah, it seems that way. Whitman seemed to crave structure, but also chafed under authority. This internal conflict, coupled with his likely undiagnosed mental health issues, created a volatile mix.
His father, using political connections, managed to secure an honorable discharge for Charles in 1964. He returned to Austin, but something was fundamentally different.
You can see it in his diary entries from this period. He writes about experiencing unusual and irrational thoughts, overwhelming violent impulses. It's heartbreaking because he was clearly aware of his deteriorating mental state.
It really is tragic. He did seek help visiting a psychiatrist at the University of Texas Student Health Center.
Right.
But according to some accounts, the psychiatrist was less than competent, even prescribing amphetamines, which may have worsened his condition.
The state of mental health care in the 1960s was vastly different from today. The stigma was immense and treatments were often inadequate. This raises the unsettling question of whether earlier intervention could have changed the course of events.
Had Whitman received proper care, could this tragedy have been averted?
It's impossible to know for sure, but it highlights the importance of accessible and effective mental health services, something that unfortunately remains a challenge even today.
Whitman was under immense pressure at this point. His marriage was struggling, he was still grappling with his academic setbacks, and his parents had recently separated, leaving him feeling responsible for his mother's well-being. It was a perfect storm of stressors.
And those stressors layered upon his existing mental health issues and potential neurological damage from years of abuse likely pushed him further into a state of despair and desperation. He was a powder keg waiting to explode.
And explode he did.
Yeah.
In the early hours of August 1st, 1966, Charles Whitman committed acts that shocked the nation and remain etched in history as one of the first mass shootings in modern America.
Horrible.
But before we delve into the horrors of that day, what are your initial impressions of Charles Whitman based on what we've learned so far?
He's a deeply complex figure, a man of immense potential battling inner demons we can only begin to grasp. His story is a stark reminder that behind even the most seemingly normal facades, there can be profound pain and turmoil.
Yeah, it's difficult to comprehend how a man who outwardly displayed so much promise could commit such horrific acts. But in the early hours of August 1st, 1966, Charles Whitman took actions that revealed the depth of his inner turmoil.
It started with the murders of his mother and wife. It's a detail that adds a chilling layer to this already complex story.
In the early morning, Whitman killed his mother Margaret and his wife Kathy. He left behind notes, almost as if trying to explain the inexplicable, yet they provide no clear motive, only further glimpses into his troubled psyche.
It's almost as if he was trying to rationalize the irrational, to make sense of something that even he couldn't fully grasp.
The notes are really a fascinating study in cognitive dissonance. He expresses remorse, speaks of overwhelming violent impulses and wanting to spare his mother from suffering, but ultimately fails to articulate a concrete reason for taking their lives. And then he sets his sights on the University of Texas Tower. This is where his meticulous planning becomes terrifyingly apparent.
He packed his car like he was preparing for a siege, an arsenal of weapons, ammunition, food, water, even a dolly to transport it all. It's a level of premeditation that's both unsettling and indicative of his disturbed mental state.
He wasn't acting on a whim. This was calculated deliberate, which makes it all the more horrifying.
Upon arriving at the tower, he used the pretense of delivering equipment to gain access. Then he fatally shot the receptionist, Edna Townsley, before barricading himself on the observation deck. This methodical approach, this transformation from seemingly ordinary student to cold-blooded killer is what makes this case so chilling.
And then at 11:48 a.m., the first shots rang out from the tower, plunging the campus into chaos.
You have to remember, in 1966, mass shootings were virtually unheard of. People initially mistook the gunfire for car backfiring. Can you imagine? It's a testament to how unimaginable such an act was at the time. This disbelief, this delayed recognition of the threat, tragically gave Whitman more time to carry out his rampage.
It's a sobering reminder of how this event changed the landscape of violence in America, how it shattered the illusion of safety, especially on college campuses.
Precisely. The Texas Tower shooting forced people to confront a horrifying new reality. It became a turning point, marking the beginning of an era where mass shootings sadly became more commonplace.
It's difficult to even imagine the terror that gripped the campus as Whitman, a trained sharpshooter, began firing indiscriminately from his vantage point.
Eyewitness accounts paint a harrowing picture. People scrambling for cover bodies, following the sheer panic and confusion as the realization dawned that a sniper was targeting them from above.
And the police were faced with an unprecedented situation. A heavily armed sniper perched high atop a tower, raining down death on an unsuspecting populace. How do they respond to such a crisis?
Well, their initial response was hampered by the sheer disbelief that something like this could happen. Like we mentioned, people laughed when told there was a sniper in the tower. This disbelief, this lack of a framework for responding to such an event, undoubtedly cost valuable time.
It's a tragic illustration how unprepared law enforcement agencies were for this type of active shooter situation. It's a stark contrast to the protocols and training that are now standard practice.
Absolutely. The Texas Tower shooting exposed a critical vulnerability and forced law enforcement to adapt and develop new strategies for dealing with mass shootings. It was a horrifying lesson learned at a great cost.
Amid the chaos and fear, there are also stories of incredible bravery. Ordinary people, students, faculty, bystanders risking their own lives to help others, shielding them from gunfire, providing first aid, offering comfort in the midst of unimaginable terror.
These acts of heroism are a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the capacity for compassion and selflessness even in the darkest of moments. They offer a glimmer of hope amidst the tragedy, reminding us that even in the face of evil, humanity can shine through.
But for many, the trauma of that day would linger for years to come. The emotional scars ran deep, leaving a lasting impact on the survivors, the families of the victims, and the entire city of Austin. How did the community cope with such a profound and public tragedy?
The psychological toll of such an event cannot be overstated. Survivors often grapple with guilt, PTSD, anxiety, and a host of other emotional scars long after the physical wounds have healed. And for the city of Austin, the Texas Tower shooting became a defining moment, a dark cloud that loomed over the community for decades.
Whitman's rampage lasted 96 minutes, an agonizing eternity for those trapped on campus, fearing for their lives.
In those 96 minutes, he fired over 400 rounds, ultimately killing 14 people and wounding 31 others. His reign of terror finally ended when police officers using underground tunnels reached the observation deck and fatally shot him.
It was a violent and chaotic end to a day that forever changed the landscape of American history.
The Texas Tower shooting became a chilling precedent, a watershed moment that forced the nation to confront the reality of mass violence. And in its aftermath, there was a desperate search for answers for an explanation that could somehow make sense of the senseless.
One of the key discoveries during Whitman's autopsy was a brain tumor. This finding immediately fueled speculation about its role in his actions. Did this tumor contribute to his violent behavior?
The discovery of the tumor added another layer of complexity to this already multifaceted case. While some experts theorized that the tumor located in the hypothalamus region of the brain could have contributed to increased aggression and impaired impulse control, others cautioned against drawing a direct causal link.
So the tumor might be a piece of the puzzle, but it doesn't provide a complete explanation. We can't simply reduce his actions to a biological anomaly.
Exactly. We have to consider all the factors at play. His abusive childhood, his documented mental health struggles, the societal pressures he faced, his easy access to firearms. It's a complex interplay of nature and nurture, biology and environment.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle where some of the pieces are missing. We can assemble a picture, but it remains incomplete.
And that incompleteness, that lack of a definitive answer, is what continues to fascinate and frustrate researchers and the public alike. We may never fully understand what drove Charles Whitman to climb that tower and unleash such horror.
The ripple effect of this tragedy, it went way beyond the campus of the University of Texas, right? It sent shockwaves through the whole nation. People were forced to confront this new, terrifying reality.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, the Texas Tower shooting, it became this watershed moment in American history. It shattered this sense of security, this innocence, especially for those in academic settings. Suddenly, the unthinkable became all too real.
In the aftermath, there was this collective gasp, this desperate search for answers. How could this happen? Could it have been prevented? And the biggest question of all, what could be done to stop it from happening again?
Those are the questions, that continue to resonate today. And the Texas Tower shooting, it really served as this catalyst for this big national conversation about gun control, mental health awareness, and the role of law enforcement in preventing mass violence.
We spent a lot of time examining Whitman's troubled past, the potential influence of the brain tumor, the societal context of the time. But I think the question that always looms largest is why? What was his motive?
It's the enigma at the heart of this case.
Right?
And despite all the research, all the analysis, we may never have a definitive answer. Whitman's notes offer glimpses into his mental state, but they ultimately fail to provide a coherent explanation. He talks about unusual and irrational thoughts, overwhelming violent impulses, but these are just fragments, not a complete picture.
It's as if he was struggling to articulate, even to himself, the forces driving him toward such horrific acts.
Right. And it's important to remember that mental illness, it's complex, it's multifaceted, it can manifest in unpredictable ways, and even when someone exhibits warning signs, it's not always possible to foresee their actions.
So we're left with this chilling puzzle, a series of clues that don't quite fit together.
But even in the absence of a clear motive, there are invaluable lessons to be learned from the tragedy of Charles Whitman and the Texas Tower shooting lessons that sadly continue to hold relevance decades later.
Yeah, one of the most glaring takeaways for me is the need for greater awareness and understanding of mental health issues.
Absolutely. Whitman's story highlights the critical importance of early intervention, accessible mental health care, and reducing the stigma surrounding mental illness. If we can create a society where people feel comfortable seeking help when they need it, we can potentially prevent future tragedies.
The ease with which Whitman amassed an arsenal of weapons also raises serious questions about gun control measures.
That's another crucial point. The accessibility of firearms, particularly high-powered rifles, played a significant role in this tragedy. Whitman's case underscores the need for responsible gun control policies that prioritize public safety without infringing on the rights of responsible gun owners.
And I think perhaps the most profound takeaway is the importance of fostering a culture of empathy, compassion, and support. A society where people are encouraged to reach out for help when they're struggling, and where those around them are equipped to recognize warning signs and offer support.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful and essential message.
Right.
If we can cultivate a more compassionate and understanding society, we can create a world where tragedies like the Texas Tower shooting are less likely to occur.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this complex and disturbing case, I want to leave you, our listener, with this thought. Charles Whitman's story is a stark reminder of the fragility of the human psyche and the devastating consequences that can arise when inner turmoil goes unchecked. But it also compels us to look inward, to examine our own biases, and to ask ourselves what we can do to create a world where mental health is prioritized, where violence is not the answer, and where empathy and understanding prevail.